Thank you for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm from Graham. Ahead today, the midterm elections are around the corner, and polls show Democrats are rapidly gaining ground in races across the country. Plus, it's a sanctuary for terrorists.
The intelligence community has been very clear to those of us on the Armed Services Committee that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are rebuilding, and they fully intend to attack the West again.
We take a look 1 year later after America turned Afghanistan over to the Taliban, and an investment in spreading the gospel. See the works of a missionary who moved his family from the Silicon Valley across the world to a small Pacific island.
When our lives are used by God, it might not be comfortable. It might not go according to our plans. But I don't want to invest in just the next 20 to 30 years of my life.
Then later, we take a look at a new Ron Howard film, 13 Lives, the true story of some members of a soccer team after them and their coach were trapped in a cave in Thailand. All these stories and more are coming up next from the CBN Newsroom.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin this half hour with polls showing Democratic candidates are rapidly gaining ground in key races across the country. This comes as the midterm elections are around the corner. Democrats are optimistic, but should they be? Adil Hurd has our top story.
Democratic leaders say they're feeling energized about their chances in this fall's elections, even while polls show most Americans believe the nation under their leadership is headed in the wrong direction. Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney is chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee.
We have had a summer of strength, and we're going to buck history by making history. We've been counted out for a while now, but we are having a comeback, and we have great candidates.
Democrats believe the momentum is coming from the passage of Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act and the fact that soaring gasoline prices have come down a little. They believe Republicans have been hurt by the Supreme Court abortion decision and the FBI raid on Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. Even Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell now says Republicans likely won't flip the Senate.
There's probably a greater likelihood the House flips than the Senate. Candidate quality has a lot to do with the outcome.
And Republican never-Trumper Liz Cheney, fresh off her overwhelming primary defeat in Wyoming, telling ABC's This Week she's starting a political organization to campaign against her fellow Republicans who are Trump supporters.
Working to ensure that we do everything we can not to elect election deniers.
But an NBC News poll shows almost 3/4 of Americans say the nation is headed in the wrong direction. And Republicans say Americans will be voting their pocketbooks and security, angry over record-high inflation and, in some cities, unprecedented rises in crime.
We're in a recession. We are experiencing the highest inflation, Chuck, in 40 years. Gas prices have doubled. There's an energy crisis in this country because this president has waged a war on energy.
Another setback for Democrats and the administration is the 2 million people who have now crossed America's southern border this year, an all-time record.
I would advise the president to go down to the border, Mr. President, and see what's happening yourself, because that's what leaders do.
We might get a clearer political picture after 2 important primary elections this week in New York and Florida. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
In other news, Russian leaders say a car bomb killed the daughter of a political terrorist who is known as Putin's brain. Reports indicate a bomb exploded in an SUV that was driven by 29-year-old television commentator Daria Dugina. Russian media says the explosion happened as she was returning from a cultural festival with her father. Daria's father is Alexander Dugina, a nationalist philosopher that is part of Putin's inner circle. A sanctuary for terrorists. 1 year after America virtually handed Afghanistan over to the Taliban, Al-Qaeda and ISIS have made Osama bin Laden's dream come true. U.S. intelligence has evidence terror groups are already building training camps inside the country, and radical Islamists intend to launch attacks against the United States. Our George Thomas has the details.
Florida Republican Congressman Mike Waltz, a decorated former Special Forces officer who led multiple combat tours to Afghanistan, tells CBN News that a year after the Taliban takeover, The country is now a sanctuary for terrorists.
The intelligence community has been very clear to those of us on the Armed Services Committee that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are rebuilding, and they fully intend to attack the West again.
Afghan watchers say the Taliban achieved what Osama bin Laden dreamed of and ISIS wished for: a full-fledged caliphate with the powers of the state.
With the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, these groups have been welcomed with open arms, even if quietly, and we've seen them reorganizing their efforts in Afghanistan.
Congressman Waltz says a year in, the consequences of America basically giving Afghanistan to the Taliban has meant a huge boost to militant Islamists everywhere.
I can share with you that the United Nations and their intelligence analysis shows that 10 to 15,000 foreign fighters are now gravitating back into Afghanistan.
In June, CENTCOM Commander General Michael Kurilla revealed U.S. intelligence that terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda are already building training camps inside the country.
Al-Qaeda may or may not choose to launch attacks against the U.S., but the fact that it has the capacity, that it has the safe haven to do so, that is what frightens me.
Indications are the Al-Qaeda-Taliban relationship is only getting stronger, as evidence that longtime Al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri lived in a posh Kabul neighborhood until the August 2nd U.S. drone strike killed him at the safe house.
The United Nations was reporting just weeks prior that top Al-Qaeda leaders were providing strategic guidance to the Taliban. And lo and behold, we kill Zawahiri in Kabul. I think this tells us everything we need to know about that Taliban-Al-Qaeda relationship.
While Taliban fighters took to the streets this week celebrating the one-year anniversary of their takeover, most Afghans stayed home, dismayed at the crippling and harsh conditions under the Taliban's Islamic rule. It's been a year since Afghan girls set foot in a classroom. Sordaba Nazan decided to run informal classes at this undisclosed home in Kabul.
The Taliban, with its extreme ideology that they have against women, have not changed. They are the same Taliban of 20 years ago. But we can't be the women of 20 years ago. We have to continue our struggle with the pen and our voices.
Women are banned from government jobs, forbidden to travel alone, and have been ordered to cover up.
Afghanistan as a whole is being denied the benefit of women and girls' contribution to society.
Meanwhile, the country's economy is in tatters, and 97% of the population has fallen into poverty, with reports of widespread starvation.
On the one hand, the economic situation is difficult. On the other hand, security situation is getting worse day by day. We still witness the same explosions and suicide attacks we used to witness in the past.
A year under Taliban rule, and there's already talk of Afghanistan becoming a failed state.
The future is very bleak. We see this as a precipice, and we are driving towards the precipice without even a safety belt on.
George Thomas, CBN News.
A U.S. district judge blasted the Department of Defense and Marine Corps for failing to grant religious accommodations to service members who objected to taking the COVID-19 vaccine. Stephen Merriday issued an injunction forbidding the DOD and Marines from enforcing a policy requiring active duty Marines and reserves to take the shot. He also ordered class action relief for those involved in a lawsuit over the mandate. Religious rights law firm Liberty Counsel filed suit on behalf of the U.S. Marines who were denied the religious accommodations. You can read this full story at cbnnews.com. More than 27 million students returned to school across the Philippines after a 2-year lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some say the time away from the classroom is feared to have worsened the alarming illiteracy rate among children in that area. Also, school officials say they are still faced with problems which include classroom shortages, lingering COVID-19 fears, and damage to some school buildings. Only 46% of the country's schools are open for in-person classes 5 times a week, while the remaining students will have a mix of in-person and online classes. Coming up, he picked up his family and moved across the world. The missionary says the investment in spreading the gospel is making a deposit on eternity. Stay with us. Welcome back to CBN NewsWatch. Moving your family from Silicon Valley to a small Pacific island may seem too big a sacrifice for some. Missionary Chen believes, though, it is paying dividends in eternity. Wendy Griffith explains.
In 2009, Chen, who was Taiwanese by birth, left a comfortable life in Silicon Valley and moved his family to Beam Island in Papua New Guinea to be missionaries. This volcanic island is only 3 kilometers across and home to about 2,000 indigenous people. It has no fresh water or modern conveniences like electricity or internet, and is only accessible by small boats. For nearly 10 years, they face the constant threat of malaria and the recurrence of his wife's cancer.
Just surviving there day by day, facing dengue fever, malaria, and things like that. You wouldn't say these things are worth it. But as Christians, I don't think the question should be how we feel about these things. The question is, as children of God, how should we interpret all these things that we experience in our lives?
Wayne and his wife Gail spent 3 years learning the language and culture and creating a Beam alphabet so they could clearly communicate the gospel. They taught the people how to read and write in their own language and began to tell the story of Jesus' death and resurrection, leading people to Christ. A local church was established in 2012, and the next year, 11 people were baptized. In 2016, the first local elders were ordained and traveled to another island 25 kilometers away to share the gospel.
Before I believed in Christ, I did lots of bad things. I took drugs, I lied, I hated people. Whatever people of the world did, I did it too. But when I trusted the Lord and became a child of God, it was like becoming a new person. When I became a child of God, I was so happy. God's word came into my life and made a huge transformation.
Before, I didn't know what grace was. After taking the literacy class and beginning to read the Bible, now I understand what grace is.
Growing their own food, building their own house, and doing everything for themselves was enough of a challenge, but nothing compared to insufficient medical resources for his wife and not being able to guarantee the health and safety of his family. For Wayne, as a husband and father, this was his greatest trial and challenge.
Someone directly told me, you don't have the right to make this decision for your children and take them to a place like that.
In the process, I would ask God, why are we doing something wrong? But when we ask ourselves if God had changed, if his love had changed, if his salvation had changed, when we thought about it, none of that had changed.
In the end, I had to search my own heart. What was I trusting for protection? Was it what I could provide as a father? Or was I simply trusting that God would take responsibility for our lives?
Leaving his comfort zone to minister in another culture, Wayne understood there would be a price to pay. But when his own faith faltered, he kept asking himself, what is it that I want to pour out my life for?
When our lives are used by God, it might not be comfortable. It might not go according to our plans. But I don't want to invest in just the next 20 to 30 years of my life. I want to invest in the next 2,000 or 20,000 years.
Actually, we don't always look at things from an internal perspective either. We understand completely we're just like everyone else. We live in the same world. But we know that God is with us, and even if we have to face death, we know that God is our dwelling place, and this explains so much to us because we know he loves us.
Wendy Griffith, CBN News.
I want to thank our partners at Good TV in Taiwan for sending us that story. Still ahead, we take a look at Ron Howard's new film, 13 Lives. Stay with us. Ron Howard's latest film, 13 Lives, takes us back to a story that gripped our world 4 years ago. It's the true story of 12 members of a soccer team and their coach in Thailand, trapped in a cave and an extraordinary 17-day rescue effort. Take a look.
Hey Rick, you following what's happening in Thailand? Some kids stuck in a cave.
Raymond, there are so many things in this story that could have gone wrong and should have gone wrong. Why do you think they didn't?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I think everybody, still can't believe that this happened, as in basically everybody was rescued.
It takes a certain kind of mindset for the deep cave diving. You have to be a bit nuts.
They're very, very dangerous.
High water level and the low visibility. Barely shoulder wide, pulling against very strong currents.
What people in Thailand really wonder is more, not about, it could have gone wrong, but more about, wow, we actually managed to bring everybody together to make something incredible.
12 boys and their coach are trapped in the flooded caves.
Hello?
Hey, they're here.
How many of you?
13.
13? They're all alive.
I've heard you say that you approach this story more like a journalist than the other true stories you've done. How so and why?
I think I've learned how to explore, get a little more granular about it. This is an interesting one because, not only were those caves to sort of transport audiences into and use for the action and suspense and so forth, but also this cross-cultural nature of this.
That's it, we better head back.
What kind of man is John?
He's incredibly strong-minded, but the thing I came away with most of all was his decency.
You're
talking about the 5-hour dive.
You try and dive those kids the whole way, all you'll be bringing out is dead bodies.
These are acts of courage and heroism, whether they're physically at risk or whether it's going to be a psychological a cost to the decision that they're making. That's all good drama, and I was looking forward to the opportunity to stage them, give these great actors a chance to shine a light on this remarkable event.
With oxygen running low, the entire nation is anxiously waiting for what will happen next.
You played the governor, and he's not involved in the diving, but he feels responsible. Why?
He has to be responsible. It's his front door, it's his home, it's his country, it's his province, it's everything. It's his people. And but yet he's controlled by something a little bit bigger than himself. But he believes in these guys that he's asked in to help with this mission.
What are you thinking? Just a crazy idea. You've got a skill none of the rest of us have.
No. It's insane. It's unethical. It's illegal.
The man's already died.
Tom, how would you describe Chris?
I could find some sort of parallels between myself and him. He's very, very ambitious.
We'll do nothing. We'll be bringing him out dead for sure.
So you are expecting casualties?
Yes. I expect casualties.
John, you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay. Just give me a minute.
Here we have a true life story, which is so miraculous, but at the same time, it shows that when we bring people from all around the world together, we can achieve something just absolutely extraordinary. And isn't that the kind of message that we want in this day and age?
You're very brave. How do you stay so strong?
We are team. We help each other.
You start to pray, you start to hope more, and eventually they were rescued, and we were very, very thankful for all this.
And we pray.
You pray?
Yes.
I bet you do. All right.
13 Lives is playing now in select theaters around the country, and you can also watch it streaming to Prime Video. Coming up, see a unique proposal that involves a cow sculptor at the Iowa State Fair. We'll have your Monday motivation as well. It's all coming up next. Stay with us. It's a moo-tastic time for an Iowa couple, making the Iowa State Fair a whole lot sweeter. Nick Buckton and his fiancée, Mackenzie Berger, got engaged in front of the famous butter cow at the Iowa State Fair. It happened over the weekend. He popped the question with some help from the cow sculptor and support from well-wishers. He says he's had this idea for quite some time. Time now for your Monday motivation, and today I want to leave you with this thought to jumpstart your week. Jesus wept, and if you trace the tracks of his tears, you'll see he wept with you and for you. Now is the time for you to weep for those who still don't know that reality, and then get to work at making sure they do know. With that word, I encourage you to make this a marvelous Monday, and be sure to have yourself a wonderful rest of the week. Do it on purpose and with purpose. Well, that is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. I want to thank you so much for watching. I want to remind you, you can always find more of our programs on the CBN News channel at any time. You can also find them online at cbnnews.com. We would love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today or any day. You can email us. The address is right there at the bottom of your screen. It's newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, we're always available for you to reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We certainly would love to hear from you. Again, I encourage you to make this a marvelous Monday and join us right back here, same time tomorrow. Goodbye, everybody, and God bless.